Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We're so glad that you could be here. I know there were a couple different programs about Lou Stovall's artistic career today, so we're glad that you chose to join us. But we hope that you will also check out the program and the resources that are available through the David C. Driscoll Center, where Lou himself is speaking tonight. My name is Lucy Kassir, and I'm the Director of Education and Engagement at the Columbus Museum in Columbus, Georgia. We are a regional history and American art museum. If you're unfamiliar with our work, I will drop a link to our website in the chat and you can learn some more. The Columbus Museum is hosting this program in conjunction with our current exhibition, What's Going Around, Lou Stovall and the Community Poster, 1967 to 1976. I'm going to share some images of the exhibition with you as I talk about it a little bit more. If you're local to Columbus, Georgia, we hope that you will come see it before it closes on April 21st, or excuse me, on April 11th, 2021. And if you are in the Washington, D.C. area, this exhibition will be traveling to Hemphill Gallery from June 12th to July 10th. The exhibition was curated by Will Stovall, who is joining us tonight, and who also authored the accompanying catalog. The exhibition catalog is available in the Columbus Museum gift shop and is also available for purchase on our website. This evening's program will pair posters from the exhibition. There we go. This evening's program will pair posters from the exhibition with black and white photographs to highlight some of the artists and activists who are working towards Black liberation in Washington, D.C. during 1967 and 1968. The concept for this evening's program was created by Will Stovall and Marya McQuirter. Excuse my tech difficulties. Will Stovall is an artist and painter who has also worked in the book medium. He holds a PhD from Yale University with a dissertation on the institutional imagination of philosopher Jürgen Habermas. He organizes the Lou Stovall Workshop in Washington, D.C., and is editing and introducing a book of Lou Stovall's poetry and art, which will be published by Georgetown University Press in January of next year. Marya McQuirter is an independent researcher, writer, and curator. She is also a faculty member in the Department of History at the University of Arizona. In 2018, she curated the DC 1968 Project, a digital storytelling platform highlighting art, activism, architecture, and everyday life in 1968 in Washington, D.C. Will and Marya are also joined this evening by Ibrahim Mumin, a longtime friend of the Columbus Museum. Ibrahim Mumin is the president of Mumin and Associates, LLC, a community economic development corporation in Washington, D.C. He is also an executive producer with the Organization for Training Others in Need. He is the chair emeritus of the D.C. chapter of the National Conference of Christians and Jews and a board member of Masjid Muhammad, the nation's mosque in Washington, D.C. Once again, thank you for joining us this evening. Following the presentation by Will, Marya, and Ibrahim, we will have a Q&A session. So if you are joining us on Zoom, you can ask your questions in either the chat or the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you are joining us over social media, you can also post your questions as comments on Facebook, and we will try to answer as many as we can. So once again, thank you all for being here, and I'm going to turn things over to Will to get us started.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Marya. Thank you, Ibrahim. Thank you for everyone who's tuning in. It was so nice to see the shots from the exhibit to begin with, because I think they really capture, seeing them all together, what has interested me for so long about them. The breadth, the range, the way the posters come from different aspects of society: music, concert posters, art, community events, politics. And it's kind of this range, or this encircling aspect that is at the heart of this program. And it's something that I I was inspired by, especially in the process of researching the exhibit and catalog and coming across Marya's work in her 1968 project, which remarkably features every single day of 1968 and brings in, kind of like the posters, all aspects of life, politics, music, culture, and it becomes a kaleidoscope, an almanac, where you really see DC DC come alive in this way. And I'm so thankful that Ibrahim is, having worked and has this connection with all these organizations, these movements, and these ideas, is here to bring even more life to this. And the image that we're beginning with, Turning Point, I'm not sure if it's available to see on screen, but yes. So this is, there are four posters, four photos too that we've selected, and they start with this one, September 1967, and they it ends with November 1968. So in a way similar to Marya's project, it's a whole year, and as we'll see, it has a kind of interesting arc of in this poster, a moment of kind of cautious optimism, where it's a poster that take from a concert series in September '67, which was just a couple weeks after the appointment of DC's first mayor, and that's the image we see here. And the concert series was organized by The New Thing, and perhaps I can, if Marya, would you, are you on mute? Yeah, I wanted to, this photos, I understand it's from outside the New Thing organization building.
Yes, that's right. And good evening, Will. Good evening, Ibrahim. And thank you so much, Lucy and Columbus Museum, for inviting us. And hello to everybody who's with us on Zoom and also on Facebook. I want to start with, share with you what I know about this photograph. And what I want to do is start with a quote. We aim to establish an art movement at the community level to develop a cultural awareness in the people of the area, whether it be via rock and roll, blues, or poetry, end quote. And this quote is from Topper Carew and Arthur Jackson, who were co-founders of the weekly jazz series sponsored by the New Thing Art and Architecture Center, as Will shared, an organization founded in 1966 to make art and architecture for the people. And so this poster that Will's dad created was one of the posters from that weekly jazz series. And the weekly concerts began in April of 1967, and they were held at St. Margaret's Episcopal Church, which is a white church right north of DuPont Circle. And I was able to find out through my research that adults paid just $1 and teens paid 50 cents for concerts that often lasted for 2.5 hours. And in this photograph, you can see Topper Carew. He's the person with the glasses, and he has on a kind of dashiki-like top. And he's surrounded by students who attended the art classes that were part of the New Thing Art and Architecture Center. And this is in front of one of the center locations, which is in Adams Morgan, which is one of the neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. And just below Topper Carew is Mayor Commissioner Walter Washington, who was giving donations to the organization. And so in addition to art, the New Thing also offered dance and drum studios and as well photography studios.
Thank you. I have a couple of slides that photographs I want to also use. First of all, like my colleagues, I want to thank the Columbus Museum for hosting this program and lifting up and showcasing a legend, Lou Stovall. There were a number of activists who were Afrocentric, moving away from the white dominated culture scene in Washington, D.C. And one was the D.C. Black Repertory Company. In this photograph, you'll see a cast picture, and in the front, Robert Hooks, who later went on to Hollywood and did a number of things. And there were just a bunch of people who came out of that womb that made their mark both in New York and in Hollywood. But part of the movement was protest, and also if you look at people, this is when people are beginning to embrace more of being Black and proud. A lot of the traditional art groups had a focus that was Eurocentric, and what the DC Black Repertory Company did was Afrocentric. There's another photograph I want to use. This is a young lady who was a volunteer fundraiser for the DC Black Rep. She happened to work in the White House, and actually, I used to think she was like a Aunt Jane, or not a very progressive, active person. But I later got to know her, and she did a lot in helping Hooks and the Black Repertory Company get money for the building that they had on Georgia Avenue near a fire station. In fact, by full disclaimer, later on I got to know her real well, and I married her. She's Carol Mookman. In the next slide, you see this is a dance school, B. Davis Dance School. I think she was up on Georgia Avenue in DC. On my left, you'll see the little girls who just started, and on the right, you see the more mature advanced classes. I'm trying to keep track of my time so that Lucy doesn't give me the hook. But I just wanted to say that one of the real challenges they had is again, the Eurocentric model. When I talk with some of the artists and the people who in that period, they said, even in where I'm from, where you guys are in Columbus, we had Black and white, but in Washington, D.C. was more subtle. It was access to places, and you were fighting an invisible enemy. And they would tell young Black girls, you don't have the proper body type to be a dancer or a ballerina, so you need to figure out how to do something else. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so this is another collaboration between Lou Stovall and Lloyd McNeil, and it's a very interesting one just in terms of the image where it's you see the forms of these figures, and the way that it was composed was that Lloyd would take tissue paper and he would tear out these forms on a piece of paper, and he working also as a flutist and being very involved in improvisation and in creating performance. He would do this in front of audiences. That was his preferred mode of working, and he my dad and especially my mom really enjoy imitating the process of Lloyd and how deliberate and carefully he would tear out the tissue paper and lay them on the paper, and that was very much a part of his process. And then in turn, my dad would cut the stencils. So he would apply silkscreen stenciling vinyl over the paper, cut them out by hand, and combine that with his hand cut lettering. And that's how the image was made. And it's also very interesting, or something I think about a lot looking at this image, and in comparison to the previous one also by Lloyd, that up to this point, they were both students at Howard together, Lloyd and my dad. But in the 2 years before this poster, Lloyd was in Paris and he was living even with Pablo Picasso for a time. And there's a very funny statement from a later Post article describing, Washington Post article describing Lloyd's career in DC. And Lloyd says, "I make a joke about it, but I say I influenced Picasso. As I grew in art, I learned that Picasso was influenced in his later years by African art. I think that was a spirit already in me. My heritage inspired Picasso." And I posit this because it captures Lloyd's personality, I think, really well, that he's kind of this wonderful showman. But it also goes to the heart of a very important conversation about ancestral arts, or how artists, individual artists, should work with a tradition, on the one hand, Western, or a tradition of America, or a tradition of, I guess it would be a question of how to make art authentically, when the question of tradition is itself something that needs to be individually decided between, especially from the African American experience of to make the figure. What do you draw on? How do you produce art? And I think Lloyd, as in this way of capturing the performance, I think does it in a way that really creates something dynamic and new, and very sudden, just in this way of being so attuned to the process of creating the forms and the spontaneity of it. So I think this is a very special piece, but it also is very special for where it sits in DC history, and this April 1968 is it's such a powerful, pivotal time. And yeah, Marya, maybe is.
Yeah, indeed. And we've paired this heroes poster with a photograph of 3 of the heroes of the Black liberation movement. And you know, as Will alluded to, there were artists and activists for Black liberation that often worked together hand in hand. Roberta Flack, for example, she donated proceeds from concerts to go toward the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. That was the organization that was co-founded by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And they also co-organized a Poor People's Campaign in the summer of 1968. And so you have here this concert that happened, the Horace Silver Quintet performed at the Bohemian Caverns on U Street on April 21st, 1968. And this photograph is from April 5th of 1968. And so it was the day after the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And this is a photograph of activists who were giving a press conference. I believe it was at the New School of Afro-American Thought near 14th and U Streets Northwest. And from the left to the right is Cleveland Sellers, Stokely Carmichael, who later renamed himself Kwame Ture, and then Lester McKinney, who later renamed himself Baba Zulu and founded a Pan-African independent school here in Washington, D.C. in 1968, a school that continues to exist. And one of the things I think is important to point out as well, that all of these individuals were all members of SNCC, of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, They were organized with dozens, hundreds, thousands of others who organized with working class folks in the South against racism, against white supremacy, against voter suppression, obviously something we're still dealing with today. And I think one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that once SNCC ended as an organization, there were many individuals who moved to Washington, D.C. because they were attracted to Chocolate City, as it would later be called, in another 5 to 8 years. But D.C. In 1957 became the first major majority Black city. And there were a lot of individuals, not only the ones shown here, Eleanor Holmes Norton, Walter Fauntroy, a whole range of others who were drawn to DC and really hoped to organize DC into a Black-led radical city.
I think there are a couple of images that I want to share in this photo. This shows a picture of the formation of the Black United Front. In this photograph, you'll see with the regular glasses on, you have Calvin Roloff, Dr. Roloff, who later became the publisher of the Informer, Channing Phillips. And behind him is Marya and Barry with the dashiki on, as we commonly call him, the mayor for life, and David Eden and Stokely. And standing on the far right is, the brother Chuck, who used to be with the Washington Afro. But I wanted to mention something that Marya said also about people from the South coming to DC. I mentioned that when Robert Hooks did his work with the DC Black Rep, he had already been to Hollywood. And these were people who were motivated to come back and bring their skills to the tribe. And so that was very important. They wanted to try and help, to develop something that would go forward. In one of the other slides that I have, again, talking about the activists who came, from the South to the city. Marya mentioned Walter Fauntleroy, who was the pastor at New Bethel Baptist Church, and he had been very much involved with helping to organize the March on Washington and the Selma to Montgomery campaign. In I think it was March of '67, you'll see from this flyer, they had a parade to kick off the redevelopment program in Shaw, and the keynote speaker was Dr. Martin Luther King. They started at Dunbar High School, and then there was a parade, and the rally ended at Cardozo, where Dr. King spoke. And this was a big thing going on in the neighborhood at the time. And so the other piece that I wanted to share with is these are some wonderful works. There's one of my friends, by the way, I was a student at Howard University at the time, and when I talk about these things, I can still smell tear gas, and I feel it in my lungs of what Washington D.C. was on fire, and there was a very active Afrocentric culture. These are two paintings by a friend of mine who was also a student at the time, George Smith. He calls himself Shamari, the artist. One shows a person he calls the unknown. He said, "You don't know me," and the other part is the real part. And in the painting on the right talks about a Ghanaian person, a warrior, and that was a theme of things he wanted to lift up. And by the way, George retired as the instructor and professor at the University of the District of Columbia. Oh, I should also mention, by the way, that this is a picture with me accompanying Stokely Carmichael to George Washington University. This was a kind of hostile environment because Stokely attacked them for how the Palestinians were being treated. And, it was an interesting experience. I'm the guy in the background with the behind Kwame or Stokely with the afro and the beard. Okay.
Sorry, I'm working out my screen share. I had an issue with it. Hold on for just a moment and I'll have it right back. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, Will, you're ready.
Yeah. So this is the one, this pairing, this is something where that all the other ones kind of revolve around, in the sense that this is something I was hoping to see for so long, to see the poster side by side with it in its actual use at the time. And so it's maybe hard to see, because I think the reds are in terms of the newspaper printing have been kind of faded out, but the excellence in education bottom left, that is the actual poster on the wall. So this is a poster for Charles Cassell's 1968 school board election, which was the first 20th century public election in DC. So this was before it was possible to vote for city council or mayor. That this was it, and it's something that I saw looking, reading Marya's 1968 project and seeing it and just being so blown away. And but before turning to her, I think it's also just such a beautiful poster, such a beautiful print for this, how the transparencies are used. It's also done in this way of having a tissue paper composition that was then changed with some text added, and then all sharpened up and processed through cutting the forms and in silkscreen and printing it. But to see that it's three colors, this orange, this red, and navy blue or royal blue, and how that's printed, you have this just amazing brown that's produced from the blue over the red. And so it also points to a year after this, and the work that my dad was doing, and getting involved with printing for Washington Color School artists like Paul Reed and Gene Davis and Sam Gilliam, who were very attracted to this way of perfect alignment of geometric forms, and also the ability for colors to be printed on top of each other, and in that way create a new color. So it's one of my favorite posters of all time, and then to be able to also see it in this amazing image, it's just it gives me, yes, it's so exciting. So thank you again for Marya for finding it.
Thank you, Will. And actually, I need to thank E. Ethelbert Miller, who is a poet and scholar here in Washington, D.C. He actually was a student at Howard University in 1968. I think he was a freshman in that year. And this is a copy of the Hilltop newspaper that he has kept for over 50 years, and that he allowed me to use for my website. So I really have him to thank for that. And so if you're on here, Ethelbert, thank you. And yeah, and interestingly, I love this image. I understand, Will, that yeah, it's wonderful to see a community poster actually out in public space. And what I really love about this pairing as well is that oftentimes I think when we think about 1968, we think about Black and white photography. And oftentimes with Black and white photography, you know, it has more of a kind of documentary, can have a more documentary feel to it. It can have a more kind of sociological feel to it. And what I think what this pairing pushes us to think about is to remember that we need to think beyond the black and white photography and think about the fact that, yeah, that people are living in color. You know what I mean? Even though there's a technological representation in black and white, people are actually living in color. And so, you know, I want to push everybody when you're looking at black and white photographs to kind of imagine and envision, you know, the colors, you know, and as Will pointed out, on the left side of the frame underneath the poster of Charles Cassell is the poster that Stovall and McNeil did. And we can see with the juxtaposition, yeah, these bright colors that are coming through. And so I want you all to think about that when you're looking at black and white photography. But yeah, as Will mentioned, this photograph is from November of 1968, when DC residents went to the polls to vote for a US president. And they also went to the polls to vote for the school board, as Will mentioned, the first local election in DC in the 20th century. The photograph was taken by one of the staff photographers whose name I don't know. Maybe somebody here knows who this possibly could have been. The Hilltop newspaper, which again was Howard's student newspaper. And I wouldn't be a true Washingtonian if I didn't mention that this school board election was also one of the first steps toward DC statehood. And statehood is something that we are still struggling toward and organizing around so that we can become the 51st state. And so again, Charles Cassell is in the poster in the left frame of the photograph. And he was one of 89 candidates for just 12 seats for school board, which I think is just incredible. It's just a kind of clear way of showing how excited people were about local education. And then one of the things I love as well, this was a campaign poster for Cassell, and that what he was interested in was excellence, in education. It wasn't equal education. He wanted excellence in education, which I think is also important. And then what I'll say as well is, when I read this photograph, I see Charles Cassell kind of side-eyeing Hubert Humphrey. He's on the poster on the door. And Hubert Humphrey was, of course, the white male Democratic candidate for president. And what's not seen in this image, but I think is also important, is that Charlene Mitchell, who was a Black woman, was the presidential candidate for the Communist Party. Take it away, Ibrahim.
Some of the images, in fact, I think the first image I wanted to talk about is that education was very important to the activists, and there were people who, like Cassell and Calvin Roloff, and I think as Marya mentioned, there were 87 other people who ran for the school board in that year who talked about reforming the systems. And there were some people in the community who went almost to the other extreme, who said, we don't think it can be reformed. We're going to establish our own school. In this photograph, we show Dr. Lonnie Shabazz and people at the Muhammad's Temple No. 4 who had established their own school. The brothers went to school in the evening, and the sisters went to school in the morning. And what they said is that they were prepared to pull away, even though their tax dollars were being used for the public school, to establish their own school because they didn't think it could work. And I think all of the people, whether they had independent schools, that Marya mentioned Ujamaa Shule, and there were a couple of other schools that came up at that time. They were all trying to have, they said excellence should also be culturally relevant. And that was something that was very important, because part of my struggle at Howard when I was there was that we had people, I remember taking a humanities class, and the instructor said we were going to study classical music, and the only music we had was music from Europeans. And so we said, what's up with this? Why don't we have some music from Africa and Asia? And he said, well, there was no classical music from Africa and Asia. And so that was a very racist and white supremacist interpretation of culture. Let me see the other slide I'll share with you. This is also a picture, and to your right, you'll see Calvin Roloff, who's running the campaign. He was not successful in his campaign, but he was there, and he was very active in the campaign and pushing some issues that he was trying to say represented Black people. And I think in the next slide, I think you'll see he went on. This is a picture of Minister Malcolm. Many people, Malcolm X, for those people who don't know, don't realize that he was the minister at Muhammad's Temple number 4 in 1963 for about a year before the Honorable Elijah Muhammad pulled him to Chicago and to New York. But I think and Dr. Shabazz, by the way, since we have, I think many people who are on from Georgia, had been the head of the mathematics department at Atlanta University. And when I was a student in high school in 1963, I was trying to invite Dr. Shabazz to come and speak to our class. We had sent him a letter and the principal rescinded the invitation. And we asked him why, and he said he was afraid some of us might become Muslims. And I told Dr. Shabazz that story one day. He laughed, because, we say in Islam, only Allah can determine who becomes a Muslim, not the principal of Spencer High School. And so education was very important in terms of the activists, whether that they were trying to reform the public school or setting up independent schools.
Okay. Yeah. So this is now a little over a year from where we began. This is November 68, and this also a collaboration between my dad and Lloyd. And there's in the next slide, there's you see, this the poster, and the way it was printed was it was the poster alongside the bottom right that's a brochure cover. So where the arrow meets the beginning of the text, that's the binding. That's where it was folded, and then you see these entry cards and meal ticket, and the bottom left is actually, I'm not sure if that's a bumper sticker exactly. I was looking at it today. I think it could be a bumper sticker or a kind of sign for other uses. But I think it's just kind of a wonderful way to kind of take a step out of the image and just think of silkscreen and the poster as a medium, and something there that's always interested me is the way the poster can spread throughout a whole city, and in terms of making additions. Sometimes my dad would print 500, 1,000. For the new thing, it was sometimes I don't know if it's myth, but he wrote once 5,000 copies, and they would hand them out. And I thought it's something kind of interesting also to give a sense of kind of the humor around these things that are, I wanted to just read a paragraph of some writing my dad has on around the question of the image spreading throughout a city, seeing the poster on the walls of polling sites, or he later did posters that would be in bus interiors. But this is a kind of a very funny thing about an unexpected place to find posters. So my dad writes of a poster thief, and he says, the most notorious poster thief was a stylish connoisseur who shared a love of my posters with a flair for party crashing. If he didn't crash a party, the party was not considered a success. People went out of their way to inform him of parties without actually inviting him. After all, the point was for him to crash. Once our unnamed party crasher and poster thief threw a sumptuous party of his own at his Georgetown house, a rabbit's warren of rooms and staircases leading to surprising rooms and levels. In addition to his friends, he also invited all of the people whose parties he had crashed, and he invited us, whose art he had co-opted. Upon arrival, we saw the posters we had made hanging on his walls, the sheer number of which was beyond our imagination. From high school events to protests and music performances, the posters were a product of my beginnings as a student in pursuit of beauty. The artist that I am today is born out of those beginnings. I thought to make the posters as good and beautiful as the energy required to put together the protests or the events. For me, all of the action was in the cause of art. The more attractive the poster, the more attention was gained. So it's, I just think it's a wonderful statement of how important the poster was for my dad, and this funny way of it being something that had a life of its own in this wonderful way.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. I love that. I just kind of imagining the person, taking the photographs and then creating their own kind of personal exhibit in their own space. It's very cool. And I do have to say too that I'm seriously geeking out here. When we were preparing for this presentation, Will mentioned that he had these other, in addition to the poster, that he also had meal tickets and name badges and other material, and I just lost it, because it's, you know what I mean, I love ephemera, and just the fact that your father had the wherewithal to not only to produce these images in collaboration with Lloyd McNeil, but also to save them, and it's just really beautiful, gorgeous ephemera. So thank you for sharing. And we've paired this poster with this image of a protest that happened in March of 1968. So just a few months before the Towards a Black University conference that was held on Howard's campus in November of 1968. But in March of 1968, about 1,000 students at Howard took over the administration building to protest, among other things, against the administration's decision to discipline students who had protested a few weeks earlier at the university's Charter Day program. And so in addition to protesting against that disciplining, students also, as Ibrahim alluded to before, that they also began to demand that the university kind of reorient itself toward Black liberation by offering more Black studies courses, and also by strengthening its coalitions with individuals and groups in the surrounding neighborhoods in the city. And when I was doing research for this, I found an article about the protest. And there was a student, Pearl Stewart, who was a reporter for the student newspaper, who had interviewed Carmen Hawker. And I'd be curious, Ibrahim, if you remember Carmen Hawker or not, but she was one of the student activists. And she stated, quote, about the protest, that this is the best thing that has happened at Howard. I'm here to stay, end quote. And one of the things I also wanted to share as well, that the images, the other 3 images are all from the DC Public Library People's Archive, which is an incredible archive of material related to DC. And I could not have done my projects without their support.
Marya, thank you. The image that you see now, I was fortunate or unfortunate, depending on who you were talking to. If you were talking to my mother, she'd say unfortunate. I was a part of the protest in 1968. If you look at the photograph on the screen, the guy who's clean shaven at the time, who says, "Howard students, prove you're not coward students." And I was just really bothered by that. What really prompted me to get involved is that I was at Crampton Auditorium when General Hershey came to speak, talking about drafting us into the selective service system. And I was against the war in Vietnam. I had no intention on going. And so when the students disrupted his speech, I was like, yeah. And then when Dr. Nabrit, the president, decided that he wanted to try, he was thinking of expelling them, And basically we said, heck no, that ain't gonna happen. And I joined people. And the irony is that I had very little communication with my family at the time. And the picture that I showed you earlier on the previous slide said, Howard students, you prove you're not coward students. I didn't know anything got back to my home except my next door neighbor had a subscription to Ebony magazine. This photograph was in Ebony magazine. And so she went next door and said, Viola, did you see Charlie at Howard? And she called, and there was a long story about, what are we sending you up there to Howard to do? And I said, I'm becoming a leader, Mama. You told me to fight for issues that you said were important to me. So that was really important. The other thing I just wanted to mention, I think I neglected to say when we were talking about the school board race and stuff, you've got to remember that DC did not have home rule at the time, not even limited home rule. And it was run by congressional committees. And most of the congressional committees were headed by Dixiecrats. They call themselves Democrats, but we're talking about Richard Russell from my home state of Georgia. We're talking about Strom Thurmond. We're talking about people from Mississippi. So there was really an adversarial and a hostile relationship to the kind of Afrocentric ideology that we were trying to promote. And so it was a real challenge in what we were trying to do. I think in the next, if we can go, this is a humorous, and I wanted to include this, guys, because I have children and grandchildren, and sometimes they think all we did was fight and stuff. But you'll see, this is the Unifics, and this person second to the right was the redheaded guy whose name was the legendary Al Johnson. And Al was, a vocalist, but he was also a very bright student. I don't know, one of my homeboys, Frank Nix, was going to try and join the call tonight, but he reminded me, I think Al Johnson was from Newport News, Virginia. And when he was in a class with him and they took the placement test, and Al scored a perfect score on the math score. So in addition to being an artist, we were talking about excellence in education on a previous slide, but they were also culturally relevant. And that night when we were in the A building, the Unifics, who were Howard students, performed. And so we were very organized and very disciplined and very polite. We weren't destroying stuff, but we were really just trying to say to the administration, you got to treat us like adults and take away the paternalistic stuff. In the next slide, I'll show you what happened. This is fast forward a year later. We ended the strike in '68, but the university reneged on its promise. So about 500 students shut the school down, and we were there for 4 days. We started on Tuesday, and on Friday, the U.S. Marshals, the DC SWAT team, I can't remember what they were called at the time, and about 1,000 National Guards came up and evicted us. I'm the person standing behind the first person, QT Jackson, who's in the picture. Our goal was to not to fight with the police, but to get to court. And we wanted to argue and put the Howard University administration under oath to talk about some of the things that they were going on. One of the big issues was the compulsory ROTC. I explained to people when I came there, I had no intention of joining the Army, so I didn't want to take compulsory ROTC, but I had to take it anyway. So eventually we were able to get rid of compulsory ROTC. We, got African studies. We got many other kind of things as a result of our protests. But, we were serious and dedicated, and we had specific, and quantifiable goals and objectives that we wanted to achieve as a result of our protests. Oh, let me just mention, before we go back to finishing up, we were talking about the culture at Howard. I can remember, I think it was the 67 or 68, I think it was 67, we had the first homecoming queen who had an afro, Robin Gregory. Before, in order to be a homecoming queen, you had to what's the proper term? Straighten your hair. Okay.
Thank you all so much for that wonderful presentation. It's really wonderful to look at these posters within the context of what was happening in Washington, D.C., both paired with documentary photography and Ibrahim's firsthand stories. So thank you all so much. We are going to get ready to move into the Q&A portion of our program. So if you have questions, you can leave them in the comments section or use the chat and the Q&A function. And I have a couple more links I'm going to share in the chat, including a link to a Spotify playlist that Ibrahim has put together for us tonight. So Ibrahim, would you like to take a minute while people ask questions and share why you chose the songs that you did?
Yes, and in fact, I don't have my list in front of me, but again, I was talking about the helping people to understand that we were complete people and not just fighting all the time. We enjoyed message music. I think in the I think there was about 5 or 6 songs that I selected, and actually we were going to play them tonight. But I think the legal people over at the museum say, we can't do that, and Lucy came up with another way of doing it. I'm not familiar with all this technology stuff or how you do it, but we talked about songs like by Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, Say It Loud, I'm Black and Proud by James Brown, Nina Simone's Young, Gifted, and Black. And we talked about, I think one of the things that I shared, there were, for those of you outside of Washington, go-go was very important. It kind of came out of DC. And I had a piece that I shared called Bustin' Loose by, Chuck Brown, who's considered the godfather of go-go. And so what I was trying to share, in addition to, we had people like the Unifics, we had the people like the Impressions, and this was music. We even had some gospel artists. I used to love listening with my colleagues with Oh Happy Day by the Edwin Hawkins singers. And so I'm hoping that whatever Lucy has developed will allow ordinary people to be able to sample these snippets, of these songs that we chose.
Yes, the link is in the chat for the Spotify playlist, so you should be able to click on that and open it up and hear and listen to the songs that Ibrahim has been speaking about. So thank you so much for adding that extra dimension to tonight's program, Ibrahim.
Okay, you're welcome.
So I'm going to kick our Q&A off with a question that came in over Facebook from Najee Dorsey, who is an artist who has been living in Columbus, is preparing a move to Atlanta, and is also the founder of Black Art in America. So thank you for being here, Najee. He said that he's loved visiting the Columbus Museum to see this show several times. His question is, do you see evidence of artists working today using their craft for community uplift via art posters and flyers like these, or like the works of Afro-Cobra artists in the late 60s and early 70s? Has this tradition continued in your opinion? And if so, where? And if not, why?
Lou, you want to go first?
That's wow. Yeah, what a question. That's yeah. I mean, I think I mean, it's so interesting to think about in terms of this year, or the past year, in terms of our experience of being in a city, and whether urban places are places for meaningful demonstration and engagement. And I think our experience with the pandemic and quarantine really brought that question up in one way, and then the events of the summer in the wake of demonstrations around the terrible killing of George Floyd brought it up in a totally different way too. And I think, I mean, from my perspective, not having lived in the 60s, it seems the question of how to, what is, I guess, just symbolic expression in city spaces, on city walls, bus stops, everything. It's just, it's still so relevant. And I think how we see a political movement have in its sights symbolic expression in terms of monuments, taking down Confederate monuments. I think art, politics, it's just as engaged and intertwined. So, I mean, that's not to say that that these are exactly artistic creations or artistic performances, but they are social. They are moments of praxis. They are ways of political action that are also involved in the same kind of thing as art and have. So that's my. But I would love to hear what Marya and Ibrahim think of that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Will. I mean, I go walking in DC quite a bit, and I've been impressed with a couple of things. One is that, yeah, I think the practice of community posters is still alive and well here in DC, that people, I've seen when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed, that an individual or collective created a poster of Ginsburg and put that, you know, all over the city, or at least in the neighborhood that I'm in, and I'm living now near Howard University. When John Lewis passed away, someone or a collective created a poster of John Lewis and put it around as well. I know that there are activists of all stripes, maybe including anarchists as well, who put up posters that were combining kind of art and also education about COVID, and also telling people using art, using the poster that, you know, if you see a police officer that's not wearing a mask, you know, that you know, obviously that's not something they should be doing and they should be reported. So for me, I do see that it's alive and well. And even interestingly, even with the city council election last year, the same way, similar to the school board election, there were dozens and dozens of people who were running for city council. And I saw huge kind of billboard style posters that people had put up, say on North Capitol, near Rhode Island Avenue and North Capitol Streets Northeast. And so again, it harkened back to those posters that school board members had created, or, you know, that Stovall and McQuirter, you know, had created. And then I'll say finally, if the person who asked the question, I would also point you to, if you're not familiar with their work, I'd also point you to Alexandra Bell's work, Counter Narratives. And she's based in New York City, where she created these huge kind of life-size posters and put them around different places in New York City. And basically she called them radical edits. She did radical edits of the New York Times newspaper. I don't know, Lucy, if you can find that quickly while I'm talking, but you know, in response to the vicious murder of Michael Brown, she created a huge poster and did these edits of the New York Times articles, you know, what she called, again, radical edits, offering a narrative to what she felt were, you know, problematic and racist depictions of Brown. So I do think it's alive and well.
And I'll add, picking up on what my colleagues have said, after the passing of John Lewis, an artist picked up something from one of his speeches. In fact, I'm wearing it tonight. You can see it says "good trouble," you know, and that was a response that John had with his mother when she talked about all the many arrests that he had gotten involved with, and he said, "Mama, this is good trouble." And I think the other thing I'll mention here in Washington, you know, the mayor renamed the 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue Black Lives Matter Plaza. And I was very happy to see on the news one night that folks from the new African American Museum had gone down and actually taken photographs, and in some case, taken some of the posters that people had put up when they came to demonstrations after the assassination of George Floyd. And I've been very much involved in the city against the fight against the killings, that we have going on here. I don't know what's going on in Columbus, Georgia, but for example, last year we had 198 murders. And I've been trying to say to people, we can't just focus on the police. We got to focus on all people who are dead. And the one artist had made a poster that says, all lives matter, and Black lives matter, whether the person who's killed is killed by police or civilian. They're still dead. And so we can't just focus on the 2%, and we've got to also focus on the 98% of the people who are killed. And I think the last thing is that in Georgia during the last election, November the 3rd, and what is it, the January 5th, somebody had a poster that says, trying to get young Black people to come to the polls, they said, we want you to show up and show out. And apparently they did. They showed up November the 3rd and defeated Donald Trump, and then showed up and showed out January 5th and sent to Washington Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff. And I just feel good being somebody who fled Georgia in 1965, that here we have a former slave state, a Confederate state, a state where Richard Russell led the opposition to Brown versus Board of Education, is now being flipped from red to blue and starting a new progressive, I think what John Lewis called a coalition of conscience in Georgia.
Thank you all for your thoughtful answers. Marya, I wasn't able to pull up an image fast enough, but I did put a link in the chat to some more information about Alexandra Bell's work. So we have another question here from Sam Smith asking, can you talk about the influence on DC and its politics that you feel Howard University has had?
Okay, well, let me just say that's an interesting question. It's both ways. I think it's Howard, first of all, Howard University obviously is a great asset. And what I didn't get a chance to drill down on in earlier comments is that one of the issues we also had at Howard in 68 and 69 when we were involved in the takeover is a kind of a arrogance and aloofness on the part of many people who were part of the university. They used to refer to people who lived around the university in LaDroit Park, Columbia Heights, and Shaw as block boys and block girls. And we said, that's not true. These are our brothers and sisters. We got to be taught to love each other. And so, we started seeing Howard University is this massive asset with the School of Medicine, School of Dentistry, the School of Social Work, the School of Architecture, the law school that produced the likes of Thurgood Marshall should be using those resources to help poor people. And it wasn't doing that. And I think obviously Howard has helped out, but I think the community has also helped Howard. It's a reciprocal relationship.
And yeah, and I'll just add to that, Ibrahim brought up the School of Architecture, and there was a group of either architecture current students or architecture graduates who formed an architectural firm called 2MJQ, and they started an architectural firm that was community centered. They rented a house not too far from Howard, right off of U Street near 9th and W Streets Northwest, and similar to Topper Carew, who was also an archivist, that they really saw architecture as a way to engage politics and help to make the city more progressive. And then I wonder if that is the Sam Smith who has, if it is, then hello, Sam. And Sam is just someone who's just been essential and critical, not only to the history and research about Washington, D.C., but also the politics of the city and moving us towards statehood.
Thank you both. Will, did you have anything that you wanted to add for this question?
Um,
I don't want to cut you off.
no, I was happy to learn. It's yeah, it's something I guess above out of above my pay grade, but
It's okay. So I have another question here from Joanna Bachman saying, thank you so much for showing these amazing posters and related images. Were Lou Stovall and or other people like Topper Carew involved in the tricontinentalism conferences in Havana or Pan-African conferences like 1966 First World Festival of Negro Arts in Senegal, in other places, and thinking about art and international solidarity? I don't know if that's anybody's areas of expertise. It might be a question that's above our knowledge level. I certainly know I couldn't begin to answer it.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's Johanna, who is also a scholar and researcher here in Washington, D.C. And I don't know the answer to that. If specifically, obviously, Will would know maybe in terms of his dad, but in terms of Topper Carew specifically. But I do think that that Lois Malu Jones, maybe she was Lois Pierre Noel, maybe by that time, I think she and her partner, I think may have gone to that 1966 conference. I think I remember reading something like that. So maybe not Carew and Stovall, but I believe Lois Malu Jones, Pierre Noel, and some other folks here from DC went to the 66 conference in Dakar. But yeah, that's a really, really great question.
And we have another question here from Rebecca Bush, who is the history curator at the Columbus Museum. And she said, it's fascinating to learn about the historical struggle for DC home rule and how it's been tied to these other moments of activism and community building. As current DC residents, how do you see local artists and or historians engaging in the discussion about DC statehood today? Does anybody want to kick us off with that answer?
Yeah, I'm familiar with a number of artists who are using their work here to work on that. And I think much of the work is not formal, it's informal. I think I can remember, for example, when I was at Howard University, people used to say, well, what you should just do is to work for 4 years or study and then go and do something. And I said, I don't believe in it. I believe you should, be involved and active and be engaged as you study. And I see a number of people doing that. And some people who are actually not even involved in formal education programs. They're just sort of, like Malcolm X, they're self-taught and doing things. And so I think that's happening, in DC, and I understand it's happening even in Columbus, Georgia.
I think that's...
Yeah, and I would say definitely in terms of scholars and researchers here in the city, that there are a number of individuals who use their research, use their status as professionals to go before the city council, to reach out to the mayor, and also to Congress as well, to speak on behalf not only of statehood, but also to speak out on other issues in turn related to defunding the police or ending mass incarceration. A whole number of issues that I've been pretty impressed by the range of scholars and researchers who are lending their time and energy and research toward those efforts.
Mm-hmm. And I think the movement to make go-go the official music of DC, I think that happened now. It's been a year, and it was part of a larger movement for DC home rule or DC statehood. involving artists and musicians.
I should say, Lucy, also, I forgot to mention, I happen to live in Shaw now. We've been here about 45 years. I'm about 2 blocks from Carter G. Woodson House, which is now a museum. And I can't tell you what has happened in the 40 years that I've been here. We've gone from a situation where most of the middle class was fleeing Shaw when I moved here. And now we're the victim of gentrification. And so much of the fight now in terms of trying to make sure that Washington is a city for all kinds of people and not just, wealthy people, but, and people are using art, to carry on that message that, Washington, D.C., certainly is no longer Chocolate City. It's a place now where everybody's trying to live. And we've got all over the city some wonderful murals. If you look at Ben's Chili Bowl and some of the other places around the city, people are expressing, the artwork and those political kind of issues.
Thank you, Ibrahim. So we have time for one more question. So I think it's appropriate to kind of bring it on home to Lou's artwork. So I'm going to mash up a couple of questions that we have into one big question for you, Will. So we had someone in the chat who was inquiring about if we knew what the first and last community posters that Lou Stovall had printed were. And we also had someone asking if you could tell us a little bit more about the workshop on P Street and how Lou was teaching about art to people who were coming in and visiting with him.
Well, thank you. Yeah, the first community poster, those would have been the early. My dad, he first started printing in a grocery store. That's how he discovered it, making signage when he was 15. And so when he came to Howard, he was printing from almost the first day, and he was printing posters for protests, for demonstrations, and so those those have all been, they were used in the activities, and so they weren't able to be collected. So the first one, I suppose, that we have is maybe the turning point, or there's a wonderful poster for Sylvia Snowden, the painter, and also Howard graduate, who from '66, and she for an exhibit she had in Delaware. And but a cool thing, that the last poster is it's green, my dad's hand cut lettering, and it says "Tax Fairly," and it was done in 2011 as my dad's take on the Occupy Wall Street movement, and that was the message he wanted. So a wonderful thing is that the relationship between the poster and between image and text is so interesting, that it's that sometimes they bleed together. Sometimes it's just image, sometimes it's just text, and I think it's a cool thing that the last one is just this statement, but it's done in his characteristic lettering, where it becomes a kind of emblem too, and but that's the last one. Yeah.
After having this exhibition on view at the museum and really getting to study how your father made his letters and the fonts that he used, and his style, it's kind of changed the way that I think about fonts, Will. So just wanted to share that with all of you. Did you have anything that you wanted to add about your father when he had his workshop on P Street and were teaching people about art and the screen printing process?
Yeah, that's been a big thing of for me, so that was at P and 21st Street, and it was before 69A, a museum, an art museum in DC, the Washington Gallery of Modern Art. And so when my dad moved in, it was it had become an annex of the Corcoran School of Art and Corcoran Gallery of Art. So it was organized with a very ambitious program in mind, where artists, not just printers, not just printmaking would be done, but painting and photography. And so the students who were working with my dad at the time were of all ages, college students from the Corcoran, but then also artists from different disciplines, different media, who wanted to make prints, painters, but then also younger people. So I think it was a time where there's so much, the stories I get, there's so much activity and so many from as this place with a museum function, a kind of student workshop function, and a printmaking function, that I think the students were primarily were in the beginning Corcoran students, but then from other areas. But a cool thing was there's a great photo of, it's a double-sided silkscreen cart that my dad built, and so at the location, the building, there's a half circle driveway, and he had it out in the front. So that was so that 6 people could make prints at once. And so that was for students, and so it wasn't just college, it was high school and younger all. But yeah, that seems, I think of all, that was seemed such a cool time, 69 to 72, and this street where it was also, Sam Gilliam was also working at a couple of blocks away, making his stained paintings and draped paintings in 68, 69. And yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. This has been such a wonderful discussion that I didn't realize it was already 7:20. So I would like to say thank you to our audience for joining us, and thank you to Will, Marya, and Ibrahim for joining us as panelists and sharing their knowledge. If you have any questions about tonight's programming, please reach out to the Columbus Museum. We'd love to talk with you and hear your feedback. Thank you again to everyone for being here. If you are able to come and see the exhibition before April 11th, What's Going Around, Lou Stovall and the Community poster will be on view until then in Columbus before traveling to Washington, D.C. So thank you all so much, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.